This is a story that touches the heart, the journey of a woman who rose from the ashes to find justice and life once again. Sometimes one moment changes everything, and sometimes justice is simply the courage to begin again. Dear listeners, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you listening from? Every message means the world to us. Wishing you a meaningful and emotional listening experience. There are moments in life when the air itself feels heavy, as if it carries the weight of choices unspoken and mistakes we never meant to make. Claire Bennett used to believe that everything could be fixed, that people were good by nature, and that love was stronger than betrayal. She believed that until the night her world shattered. She lived in a quiet part of the city, surrounded by clean streets and polite neighbors who smiled, but never truly looked. Her husband, Ryan Cole, was everything she thought she wanted: charming, successful, confident. But behind his perfect smile lay something darker, something she refused to see until it was too late. It started with whispers, late-night calls he claimed were work, a change in his eyes when he looked at her, like a man staring through glass at a life he no longer wanted. Claire tried to ignore it, telling herself that every marriage had its storms, but denial has a way of turning into a noose. One evening, as rain tapped gently against the window, she found an email on his laptop. A reservation for two, a weekend at a secluded resort, signed not with her name, but someone else's. Her hands trembled as she read it, her reflection ghosted across the screen. The woman she saw staring back was a stranger. Hollow eyes, pale skin, trembling lips. When she confronted Ryan, he didn't deny it. He just stared at her, cold and distant, and said, "You always wanted everything perfect, Claire. Maybe that's why I looked elsewhere." The words didn't just break her. They erased her. Days turned to weeks, and what had once been a home became a museum of silence. The laughter that once lived in the corners of the house was gone, replaced by the ticking of a clock that mocked her with every beat. Ryan stopped coming home most nights, and when he did, the smell of another woman clung to him like cheap perfume. Claire found herself drifting, walking the city streets at dawn, staring at faces of strangers as if one of them might hand her a reason to keep going. It was during one of those early walks that she met Emily Lane, a gentle woman with tired eyes and a kindness that didn't ask questions. Emily owned a small coffee shop, a place that smelled of cinnamon and second chances. Claire began to spend hours there, sitting by the window, pretending to work while she simply watched the world move on without her. Emily didn't pry. She just refilled her cup and said softly, "Some people walk through fire before they remember who they are." At first, Claire didn't understand what that meant, but she would soon. One night, Ryan came home earlier than usual, furious and intoxicated. His business deal had gone wrong, and he blamed her for everything, for his failure, his unhappiness, even his own guilt. The shouting was endless, the words sharper than any blade. When he threw a glass across the room, it shattered against the wall, spraying fragments like frozen tears. She stood still, watching him, feeling a strange calm wash over her. Something inside her had died long before this night. But in its place, something new was beginning to breathe. The next morning, she packed a small bag, left her wedding ring on the counter, and walked out without looking back. She didn't know where she was going, only that it had to be away from him, away from the poison of what her life had become. But fate, cruel and deliberate, wasn't done with her yet. Days passed like smoke, shapeless, drifting, impossible to hold. Claire rented a small apartment on the edge of the city, a place that smelled of dust and forgotten dreams. She tried to rebuild herself, to start over, to breathe without fear. But the world has a cruel way of testing those who dare to begin again. She found work at a local art studio, managing exhibits and cleaning brushes long after the others had gone home. The hours were quiet, almost sacred, and for the first time in years, she felt invisible in a way that was peaceful. Emily's son, Noah, had taken a liking to her. He was a bright boy with messy hair and too many questions, and sometimes his laughter was enough to make her forget that her heart was still healing. But healing never comes without pain. One afternoon, a man walked into the cafe, tall, quiet, dressed in a dark jacket that had seen better days. His name was Ethan Hartman, a former firefighter who had left the service after a tragedy no one dared to mention. He spoke little, smiled rarely, and seemed to carry his own ghosts. But when he looked at Claire, there was something in his eyes, recognition maybe, or empathy. He became a regular. At first, they exchanged only brief nods, then, slowly, words. Then the kind of silence that only exists between people who have both known loss. It was Emily who first noticed the change in her friend. She said, one morning, setting down a cup of coffee, "You're lighter now. But be careful, Claire. Fire may warm you, or burn you again." Those words would haunt her soon. Because Ryan hadn't disappeared. He had been watching. His business had collapsed, and his bitterness grew like mold in the dark. He blamed her for everything, for leaving, for surviving, for finding a peace he couldn't buy. One night, Claire returned to her apartment and found her door slightly open. Inside, the scent of his cologne lingered. On the kitchen counter sat a photo, their wedding picture, torn clean down the middle. She froze. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "If you think you can erase me, you're wrong." The next day, Emily's cafe caught fire. It started small, a flicker behind the counter, a thread of smoke curling up from the storage room, but by the time anyone realized, it was too late. The flames spread fast, licking the walls, devouring everything. People screamed and ran, glass shattered and heat roared like an animal set free. Claire was inside. She had come early to help Emily close up. She remembered the moment, The scent of burnt coffee, the scream of the alarms, the way her body moved before her mind could think. She shouted for Noah, found him near the back, coughing and terrified. She grabbed him, covering his face with her jacket, and ran toward the door. Smoke choked the light. Fire coiled along the ceiling. The world became orange and black and endless sound. Just when she thought she couldn't make it out, strong arms pulled her through the haze. Ethan. His face was streaked with soot, eyes wild with fear. He carried Noah, then went back inside because Emily was still there. Claire screamed after him, but he didn't listen. Minutes later, the roof gave way. The explosion threw her backward into the street. For a moment, everything stopped. The world turned white and silent. When she opened her eyes, Ethan was beside her, Emily in his arms, both covered in ash. They were alive, barely, but alive. Later that night, Claire stood among the ruins, watching the smoke curl into the cold sky. The cafe was gone. Emily's dream, her refuge, had burned to the ground. But in the middle of all that destruction, she felt something new. Not despair, not fear, but clarity. Someone had done this on purpose, and deep inside her, beneath the grief and the soot, a single truth began to form. She was not going to run anymore. The fire had left more than ashes. It had carved a scar across the city and across Claire's soul. The cafe was gone, but the memory of the flames still flickered behind her eyelids whenever she closed her eyes. The smell of smoke lingered in her hair for days, no matter how many times she washed it. Emily and Noah were alive, but barely. Emily had burns on her arms and face, wounds that would fade but never vanish. Noah woke up at night screaming, his small hands clawing at the air as if the fire still surrounded him. And Ethan, he was the one who saved them all, but the cost was high. His lungs were damaged, and he refused to rest, insisting he was fine. Claire knew it wasn't an accident. She felt it in her bones, in the way the flames had started, in the smell of accelerant, in the way the fire moved unnaturally fast. It wasn't chaos, it was intention. Ryan Cole's name echoed in her mind like a curse. She went to the police, gave her statement, showed them the threatening message. They nodded politely, wrote notes, promised to look into it. But days passed, then weeks, and nothing happened. The case went cold before it even began. Justice, it seemed, was only for those who could afford it. But Claire wasn't the same woman who once trembled before her husband's anger. She had seen what fire could destroy and what it could reveal. Ethan began helping her quietly. He had contacts, people he trusted from his days in the department. They dug into Ryan's background, followed whispers, pieced together fragments. What they found was worse than either of them expected. Ryan's company had been tied to money laundering, fake investments, and insurance scams. When his empire began to crumble, he had tried to cash in on his own ruin by burning down what wasn't his to destroy. The cafe, Emily's cafe, had been a target. Not just revenge, but profit. Claire's hands shook when she read the reports. Every document felt like a knife, each proof another betrayal. "He did this," she whispered one night, standing in Ethan's small apartment. "He took everything, Ethan. My marriage, my peace, and now this." Ethan looked at her, not with pity,
but with understanding. "Then you take something back," he said quietly. That night, for the first time, Claire didn't cry. She planned. They gathered evidence, photos, insurance claims, emails, witness statements. Ethan risked his job, his safety, even his health. He broke into the storage unit Ryan used for records, and there they found the final proof: security footage from a week before the fire.
A man in a hood entered the back of the cafe, carrying a container of fuel. His face was hidden, but his car, his license plate, wasn't. It was Ryan's. Claire felt her breath stop. It wasn't shock anymore. It was certainty. She sent the footage anonymously to the authorities, attached with a single message: "How many more have to burn before you act?" 2 nights later, she woke to the sound of glass shattering. Her apartment window, broken. A brick lay on the floor. Attached to it, a note written in hurried scrawl: "You should have stayed quiet." Fear crawled up her spine, but it didn't reach her eyes. She looked out into the darkness, at the silhouette of the city, and whispered to herself, "I'm not afraid anymore." She wasn't, but she was being watched. Everywhere she went, she felt it, the presence just behind her shoulder, the slow shadow that followed when she walked home. Ethan insisted she stay with him, and for a while the walls of his apartment felt like protection. One evening, as they were reviewing the case files, Ethan coughed hard, the kind that left him breathless. His lungs had never fully healed. She helped him to the couch, her hand trembling as she touched his face. "Don't you dare leave me now," she whispered. He smiled weakly. "You brought me back once, Claire. Maybe that's enough." She stayed by his side until dawn, watching the light creep through the window, painting the room in soft gold. It was the first sunrise in months that didn't look like smoke. But just as the world outside began to wake, her phone buzzed again. A message. Unknown number. This time, it was a video. It showed her apartment. Empty. Silent. The camera panned to the corner. Her wedding photo, burned at the edges, still hanging on the wall. And then a voice. Calm, cold, familiar. "Justice isn't yours to give, Claire. It's mine." The screen went black. Her heart stopped. She turned to Ethan, and in that moment she knew this wasn't over. The fire had only just begun. Morning came with a silence that felt unnatural. The world outside continued. Cars moved, people hurried, lives went on. But inside Claire's chest, everything had stopped. The video replayed in her mind again and again, Ryan's voice echoing through every corner of her thoughts. She could almost feel him near, smell the faint trace of his cologne, the same one that used to make her heart race for all the wrong reasons. Fear was a language she had once spoken fluently, but now it felt foreign. She had been broken before, and somehow she had survived. She wasn't the same woman he'd left behind.
Ethan refused to let her face it alone. Together, they traced the origins of the video. The signal had bounced through multiple servers, but one lead stood out: an abandoned property once owned by Ryan's company, now empty on paper, but active in truth. That's where he was hiding. Claire wanted to call the police, but Ethan knew better. "They'll never get there in time," he said, "and even if they do, he'll vanish again."
She stared at the printed map between them, at the line that led to the outskirts of the city. Her heart beat steadily, not from panic, but from purpose. "Then we go ourselves," she said quietly. The drive was long and silent. The sky was overcast, the horizon painted in shades of gray. When they reached the property, the building loomed before them, an old warehouse, windows shattered, the remnants of a forgotten business. They moved carefully inside. The air smelled of dust and oil, of memories best left buried. At the far end of the hall, a door stood half open. Claire pushed it gently, and the light from outside spilled across the floor, revealing Ryan. He looked nothing like the man she once married. His suit was wrinkled, his hair disheveled, his eyes red with exhaustion. There was a madness there, not sudden, but grown over time, like rust on metal. "So it's true," he said softly, almost with wonder. "You came back." She didn't answer. Her voice would have given away the storm inside her.
Ryan stepped closer, the faint glint of a gun in his hand. "You took everything from me, Claire. Everything I built, everything I deserved. And you think you can just start over?" She felt Ethan shift behind her, but she lifted her hand slightly, a silent plea for him to stay back. "You destroyed yourself, Ryan," she said, her voice calm, steady. "I just stopped helping you do it." For a moment there was silence. Then Ryan laughed, a low, broken sound that barely resembled laughter at all. "You think you're innocent? You think this makes you better than me?" His words bounced through the empty room, but she didn't flinch. "I'm not better. I'm free." The gun wavered in his hand, his face twisted, anger, confusion, despair, all colliding into something fragile. And in that instant, Ethan stepped forward. "Put it down, Ryan. It's over." Ryan's eyes darted between them. Then, without warning, he pulled the trigger. The shot echoed, sharp and final. Claire screamed, but it wasn't Ethan who fell. Ryan staggered backward, clutching his side. The gun slipped from his hand and clattered to the floor. For a moment his eyes met hers, not with hate, but with something almost human. Then he collapsed. Ethan rushed forward, checking his pulse. Still alive. Barely. He looked up at her. "Call for help." Her hands shook as she dialed, her breath coming in short bursts. When the sirens finally arrived, she stood outside the warehouse, watching as they carried Ryan away on a stretcher. She didn't feel victory, just an aching quiet. Later at the hospital, the doctors said he would survive. Prison would follow. Justice, the kind written on paper, would finally come. But standing there, staring through the glass at the man who once owned her life, she realized that justice was never what she truly wanted.
What she wanted was peace. Ethan's hand found hers. His grip was warm, grounding. "It's over now," he whispered. but she shook her head slowly. No, Ethan. It's beginning. That night, she returned to what was left of the cafe. The rubble had been cleared, but the air still carried the faint smell of smoke. She walked through the empty lot, her steps slow and deliberate, until she reached the center, the place where the flames had been the strongest. She knelt there, touching the ground. It was cold now, lifeless. But somehow, in that emptiness, she felt alive again. For the first time in years, she didn't feel haunted. She felt awake. Weeks passed. The city had returned to its rhythm, indifferent as always. People hurried, traffic hummed, life moved forward. But for Claire, time had slowed to something more fragile, more deliberate. Every morning, she woke not to fear, but to silence. The kind that asked nothing from her. Ryan was gone. Not dead, but gone in the way that mattered most. The trial had been swift. The evidence was undeniable. For the first time, the lies that had once protected him turned against him. The name that used to hold power now only whispered shame. Claire didn't attend the sentencing. She didn't need to. Justice had been served. But peace, she learned, was something earned in quieter ways. Ethan stood by her through it all, never demanding, never rushing. He understood the language of grief, the pauses, the unspoken things. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the skyline, he found her sitting at the edge of the rebuilt cafe site, now fenced and ready for a new beginning. He sat beside her. "They're going to start rebuilding next week," he said softly. "You should be proud. People believe in this place again." She smiled faintly. "I don't know if I want to rebuild it the same way." He turned toward her. "Then don't. Build something new." The simplicity of his words sank deep. For the first time in a long while, the thought of tomorrow didn't frighten her. In the weeks that followed, she began again. Not as a victim, not as someone defined by the shadows of her past, but as a creator of something honest, something real. The new cafe opened on a quiet morning in spring. Its name was painted across the glass in soft gold letters, Second Sun. People came, strangers, friends, those who had once whispered about her in secret. They came for coffee, for warmth, for something they couldn't quite name. Claire greeted them all with a calm, radiant grace. Emily, her friend who never gave up on her, handled the books. Noah helped design the garden behind the cafe. Wildflowers, vines, colors that didn't ask permission to bloom. And Ethan, he stayed, not as a savior, but as someone who had chosen her not for her pain, but for her strength. One evening, as the cafe lights glowed soft against the twilight, he found her outside, locking the doors. "You did it," he said quietly. She looked around at the laughter drifting from inside, the glow of the sign, the scent of warm bread and coffee, and then back at him. "No," she said with a small smile. "We did." They stood there, neither rushing the silence. The night was calm, the air cool, the stars shyly appearing one by one. Claire closed her eyes for a moment, listening, not to ghosts, but to life. And in that stillness, she realized what was lost would never return, but what she had found, courage, love, freedom, was something Ryan could never touch. She took Ethan's hand. They walked down the quiet street, side by side, the glow of the cafe behind them fading into the distance. The night was dark, yes, but somewhere ahead there was light.